Everyone in the courtroom expected the morning to move along quietly, maybe even slowly, the way legal hearings normally do. The wooden benches were filled with soft murmurs, the sound of shuffling papers, and the occasional squeak of a chair sliding against the polished floor. Nothing felt unusual. Nothing felt dramatic. But that calm atmosphere shattered the moment a little girl walked in holding the leash of a trained police dog. It wasn't just a sight of a child in a courtroom that drew everyone's attention. It was the expression on her face, a mix of courage, fear, and something even deeper that no one understood yet. Her dog stayed close, walking beside her with the steady discipline only a police K-9 could have. No one knew that in a few minutes, this gentle pair would change everything, and the judge would be forced to stop the entire courtroom because of the signal so small most people never even saw happen. The girl's name was Emily, only 10 years old, yet today she carried a weight much larger than herself. She tried her best to stay composed, her fingers curled gently around a braided leash, her steps slow but steady. Her police dog, Shadow, walked with his head slightly lowered, scanning the room, sensing every movement, every shift in energy. His presence made people feel safe without him doing anything at all. He didn't bark, didn't pull. He simply observed. Shadow had been trained for years to support children in high-pressure situations, especially kids who needed a sense of protection to speak confidently. He understood emotions better than most adults, and he was there for one reason only, to ensure Emily felt secure. Emily's family sat quietly on one side of the room, watching her with deep concern. They knew she didn't like crowds, and she especially didn't like attention. But she had agreed to come here because something important needed to be said. Her voice mattered, and Shadow was the one who had helped her find that voice again after months of fear and uncertainty. He had become her comfort, her partner, and in some ways, her shield. When Emily reached the witness stand, her legs dangled a little above the floor. Shadow sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his fur brushing against her shoes. She took a small breath and rested her hands on her lap. The judge watched her carefully, offering a gentle nod. He had a soft spot for young witnesses, especially those brave enough to speak in such an intimidating space. He didn't rush her. He didn't push. He simply let her settle. The courtroom grew quieter. Even the air felt still. The lawyer began with simple questions, his tone warm and slow, giving Emily time to respond. She answered softly, her voice occasionally trembling, but always trying to stay strong. People sitting behind her leaned forward slightly, paying full attention to every word. Shadow shifted now and then, not in fear but in awareness, as if he was reading each change in Emily's breathing. For a while, everything seemed normal. The questions were gentle. Emily's responses were honest, and Shadow remained calm, listening without reacting. But then, halfway through a sentence, Emily paused. Her eyes drifted toward the back of the courtroom. It was only for a second, so quick that most people wouldn't have noticed. But in that tiny moment, something in her expression completely changed. The softness in her gaze tightened. The color in her face drained just a little. Her hands curled slightly at the edges of the wooden stand. Shadow noticed instantly. He lifted his head, his ears pointing forward. His eyes locked in the same direction Emily had just looked. His muscles tightened beneath his coat, subtle but undeniably alert. For anyone who understood trained police dogs, this wasn't just a shift in posture. Shadow was reacting to a signal, a hidden cue only Emily could give. Months earlier, Emily had been taught a secret gesture to use only when she felt unsafe, overwhelmed, or too frightened to speak out loud. It was a tiny movement, barely visible, something she could do quietly without drawing attention. It wasn't meant to start chaos. It wasn't meant to alarm anyone. It was simply a sign meant for Shadow, and Shadow alone. Emily made that signal now, a small, almost invisible twitch of her fingers against her leg. Shadow responded immediately, lowering his body slightly and positioning himself in front of her, not aggressively, but protectively. His eyes stayed focused. His breathing slowed. His entire body language shifted from calm companion to silent guardian. At first, only Emily felt the change. Then the judge noticed. He leaned forward, his expression sharpening. He had seen police dogs enough times to understand that this wasn't normal behavior. A highly trained K-9 didn't react unless something important triggered it. The judge raised his hand slightly, signaling the lawyer to pause. The room went still again, this time with tension rising like a tight string ready to snap. The lawyer looked confused but stepped back. The defense attorney turned to look around the room. People whispered, wondering what had caught Shadow's attention. But Emily kept her gaze down, her breathing uneven. Shadow didn't move. He stayed exactly where she needed him, positioned like a shield between her and whatever she had seen. Then came the moment that froze everything. Shadow let out a sound, a low, soft growl that barely reached the front row, but carried a weight that sent a ripple through the entire courtroom. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. It was a warning, a signal that something wasn't right. The judge stood up so quickly that his chair made a sharp sound against the floor. His voice cut through the silence with authority. "Stop. Everyone stay exactly where you are." The lawyers froze. The jurors exchanged startled glances. Emily didn't move. Shadow didn't blink. The tension in the courtroom rose like a wave nobody could see coming. People turned toward the direction Shadow was staring, trying to figure out what had triggered him. But whatever Emily had noticed, whatever she had feared, wasn't clear to anyone else. The judge narrowed his eyes, studying the crowd, trying to understand what danger a child and a trained police dog had sensed before anyone else. But the room stayed quiet. Too quiet. Shadow's posture didn't loosen. Emily's fingers still trembled slightly. And the judge, realizing this wasn't just a nervous reaction, lifted his hand once more and signaled for security. Because something was wrong. Something Emily had seen. Something Shadow was now guarding her from. And the entire courtroom was seconds away from discovering the truth. But not yet. Not before the moment that would change the direction of the trial and reveal why a little girl had been taught a hidden signal meant only for her police dog, and why the judge had to stop everything the instant she used it. A quiet heaviness settled over the courtroom as everyone tried to understand what triggered such a sudden reaction from Emily and Shadow. Even the smallest movement felt too loud. The judge's eyes remained fixed on the back row, the same area where Emily had glanced before giving her hidden signal. But all he saw were faces filled with confusion and curiosity. No one stood up. No one moved suspiciously. On the surface, everything looked normal. But Shadow's posture didn't lie. Emily kept her eyes on the wooden stand in front of her, her fingers still pressed tightly together. She looked as though she wanted to disappear into the seat. The judge softened his voice, trying not to startle her further. "Emily," he said gently, "take your time." She didn't respond. Shadow remained alert beside her, eyes locked on the same spot as before, ready to act if she needed him again. The courtroom attendees looked between the girl, the dog, and the judge, trying to piece together a puzzle that only Emily understood. The judge signaled quietly to one of the court officers near the wall. The officer nodded and began walking slowly along the back row, scanning faces the way a trained professional would, without drawing too much attention, but also missing nothing. Still, Emily avoided looking toward that side of the room. Her shoulders stayed stiff, the fear she was fighting slowly creeping across her expression. The judge could tell she wasn't ready to explain anything yet, and pushing her would only make things worse. So instead, he cleared his throat softly and shifted the tone. "We will pause the questioning for a moment," he announced, keeping his voice steady. Everyone stayed seated. A quiet wave of murmurs traveled through the room, but the tension remained. Emily still hadn't looked up. The judge studied her carefully. There was something deeper here, something she hadn't said yet, something that had brought her to this courtroom in the first place. And he wasn't the only one trying to understand. On the front bench, Emily's mother watched her with a tight grip on her purse, concern etched across her face. Her father sat beside her, jaw clenched, staring in the same direction Shadow had locked onto. It was clear that whatever Emily sensed, they feared it too. The story behind this case had already carried a certain weight. Emily was a key witness. Her testimony mattered not because of dramatic accusations or explosive revelations, but because she carried details only a child would have noticed. Details that adults had overlooked. Details the investigators realized they desperately needed. But no one knew how much she had kept to herself. No one realized how much Shadow understood without her speaking. Before she ever stepped into the courtroom, before she ever sat on the witness stand, there had been months of quiet moments where Emily had tried to find her courage again. Her connection with Shadow hadn't happened instantly. It had been built slowly, carefully, through gentle routines and small breakthroughs. Shadow had been assigned to her after investigators realized that Emily communicated more clearly around him than with anyone else. With adults, she froze. With strangers, she shut down completely. But with Shadow, she opened her heart. She talked to him late at night when she couldn't sleep. She sat beside him during interviews. She leaned on him whenever the world felt overwhelming. And it wasn't just comfort. Shadow was trained to observe patterns, behaviors, reactions. He read Emily like a book, her breathing, her posture, her hesitation. She didn't need to explain her feelings to him. He felt them. He understood them. That was why he reacted instantly when she made the hidden signal. The judge knew none of these details, but he could see the bond between them clearly. Emily trusted Shadow more than anyone else in the room. He spoke carefully again. "Emily, is someone in this courtroom making you uncomfortable?" The question hung in the air like a fragile thread. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. She didn't nod. She didn't shake her head. She simply sat there, frozen but aware that every pair of eyes was on her. She started shifting her fingers again, a nervous habit she had been doing all morning. Shadow responded subtly, lowering his head and brushing it against her leg to ground her. A small comfort. A tiny reminder that she wasn't alone. The judge didn't push her further. He turned to the prosecutor, who looked equally unsure of how to continue. The courtroom tension wasn't fading. If anything, it grew heavier every passing second. "We will need a short recess," the judge finally said. "Court will remain seated until my instructions." But something happened before he could strike the gavel. Shadow lifted his head again. This time it was sharper, more focused. A small gasp came from someone in the gallery. Not loud, but enough to make people turn. The officer who had been checking the back row stopped walking and narrowed his eyes at a man sitting near the corner. The man looked ordinary enough, neatly dressed, quiet, trying not to draw attention. But there was something off in the way he shifted his weight, something too controlled. Emily's breath hitched when she caught the movement from the corner of her vision. The judge noticed immediately. "Officer," he said, keeping his voice low but firm. The officer approached the man slowly. People leaned back, slightly to avoid getting in the way. The tension spiked once more. Even without knowing the details, everyone could feel the weight of the moment. Emily squeezed the edge of the witness box as tight as she could. Her knuckles turned pale, but she still didn't look up. She didn't have to. Shadow was already standing now, not lunging, not barking, just standing, ready and alert. His tail stayed low, his posture controlled but unmistakably protective. The officer reached the corner of the row. The man didn't move, not at first, but then his foot tapped softly against the floor. It was a small tremble, a nervous habit, or maybe something else entirely. The judge raised a hand instinctively. "No sudden movements," he warned. The man swallowed, eyes darting across the room. And that was enough. Shadow shifted his stance again, muscles tightening. Emily's body reacted too. Her breath caught and her shoulders lifted in fear. She recognized that man. She had seen him before. And her silence told the judge everything he needed to know. But the courtroom still didn't understand. People exchanged confused whispers. No one knew what connection Emily had with the man in the corner. No one knew what history existed between the frightened girl and the suddenly tense stranger. The officer moved closer. The man placed his hand slowly on his knees. Shadow's ears tilted forward. Emily's heartbeat quickened. The judge's voice dropped. "Sir, please remain where you are." But the man didn't answer. He simply stared straight ahead, jaw tight, eyes cold, not at Emily, not at the officer, but at something only he could see, something that made him freeze instead of flee. The courtroom fell into a silence, so heavy it felt like the walls were holding their breath. And in that silence, the mystery deepened. Why had Emily signaled Shadow? Why did he react so strongly? Who was this man? And what secret had followed Emily into the courtroom that morning? No one had answers yet, but everyone could feel one thing. This wasn't over. Not even close. The officer stood only a few steps from the man in the corner, yet the space between them felt charged, as if the room itself sensed something hidden beneath the surface. Emily still hadn't lifted her head. She didn't need to. She could feel the man's presence like a shadow across her skin, the same familiar heaviness she had been trying to forget for months. Shadow remained in front of her, protective and steady, reading her fear like it was the clearest signal in the world. But the man didn't move. His stillness was almost unsettling, like he was waiting for something, permission, a mistake, or the chance to speak before someone else did. His eyes stayed locked forward, refusing to look at Emily or Shadow. The courtroom watched him in silent confusion. The judge studied him carefully. He didn't want to jump to conclusions, especially in a sensitive case involving a child witness and a trained police canine. But there was no denying the tension climbing through the air. It wasn't just the dog reacting. It was Emily, her trembling hands, her stiff posture, the way she held her breath every time the man shifted even slightly. None of it was normal. "Officer," the judge said quietly, "ask him if he knows the witness." The officer nodded and turned to the man. His voice was firm. "Sir, do you have any connection with this child?" The man blinked, his jaw tightening. His answer came slow, almost too slow, as if he had to choose the words carefully. "No." It wasn't loud, but the single syllable echoed. Emily flinched. Shadow's tail went stiff. The judge frowned. He wasn't sure what was wrong, but even from a distance, he could see the truth in Emily's reaction. Children didn't react like that to strangers, not in such a deep, instinctive way. The prosecutor leaned toward the judge slightly. He whispered something, too softly for the rest of the room to hear. The judge nodded once, considering his options. The case had always carried layers of complexity, but now those layers were unfolding in ways none of them had prepared for. One of those layers involved Emily's past. The long nights she couldn't sleep, the quiet moments she spent drawing circles on Shadow's fur, the way she always checked locked doors twice. Her parents had tried to protect her, and Shadow had become her main source of comfort. But something from before the case had followed her, something she never completely explained. The judge turned back to her gently. "Emily, sweetheart, do you recognize that man?" Emily didn't raise her head, but her fingers curled tighter around the wooden edge. Shadow shifted, standing even closer, as if to remind her she didn't have to answer alone. Instead of replying, she whispered something so quiet it barely reached the microphone. "Can we stop?" Her voice cracked. A soft wave of sympathy swept through the room. People weren't sure what she meant. Stop the questioning? Stop looking at the man? Stop the entire moment from happening? No one knew, but her plea carried fear, and fear always said more than words. The judge's expression softened. "We will take a break soon. You're safe here." Safe, a simple word. But Emily's reaction showed she didn't fully believe it. Her mother stood up from the bench. "Your Honor, if she needs." "Ma'am, please stay seated," the judge said kindly. "We'll handle this carefully." Her mother sat back down slowly, eyes full of worry. The man in the corner shifted again. Just a small movement, barely a few inches, but it was enough for Shadow to step forward with a low rumble. It wasn't aggression. It was warning, controlled, focused, exactly what he was trained to do when his handler signaled danger. The officer placed a hand on his radio, ready to act if needed. "Sir, I'm going to ask you to stand up." The man didn't stand. He just stared at the floor, breathing too slowly, like he was forcing calm into his body. People whispered from the rows behind him, unsure whether to lean away or watch more closely. The judge had to make a choice. "Officer, escort him out for questioning." Emily squeezed her eyes shut. Shadow stood tall, muscles tense. The officer took another step toward the man. That was when another voice broke through the silence, calm, steady, but unmistakably tense. "Your Honor," the defense attorney said, rising to his feet, "before you remove a member of the gallery, you should know something important. My team has seen this man before. The courtroom stiffened. The judge turned in surprise. Explain. The attorney adjusted his glasses. He's been present at every hearing related to this case, sitting in different places, never speaking to anyone, never drawing attention. Murmurs rippled across the room. The prosecutor frowned deeply. Why wasn't this reported? The attorney shook his head. Because we couldn't prove he had any connection to anyone involved. He didn't violate any rules by sitting in the gallery. We assumed he was simply watching. But now he's a problem, the prosecutor muttered. The judge narrowed his eyes. Has he spoken to either legal team? No, the defense attorney replied. Not once. The judge turned to the officer. Escort him out quietly. We will question him separately. The officer approached again, but this time the man finally lifted his head, just slightly, just enough of the light to catch the uneasy tension in his expression. Why? He asked softly. I didn't do anything. His voice trembled, not with fear, but with something else. Something like guilt, or maybe exhaustion. Emily's breathing faltered. Shadow took one step forward. The officer placed a hand near the man's elbow, but didn't touch him. Sir, please come with me. The man swallowed again, glancing once toward the front of the room. Not at Emily, not at Shadow, but the judge, as if deciding whether to speak or stay silent. Then, for the first time, he whispered something barely audible. I shouldn't have come here. Emily's reaction was immediate. She pulled in a sharp breath, her small body tightening. Shadow leaned against her leg protectively, ready to respond at the slightest movement. The judge leaned forward. Sir, stand up. But the man didn't. He kept looking straight ahead, frozen in place, like he was stuck between two choices. Leave quietly or say something that would change the direction of the entire trial. The officer tried again. Sir, on your feet. Still he didn't move. And then he whispered again, barely moving his lips. She remembers. Emily's eyes shot open. Shadow stiffened. The judge's face paled. The officer reached for his arm. But the man finally stood up, with no struggle, no aggression, just a strange, heavy resignation. He kept his hands visible and walked with the officer toward the side door. The courtroom watched every step, their minds crawling with questions. Who was he? What did Emily remember? Why had he attended every hearing? And what secret was hidden between him, the little girl, and the silent police dog who reacted before anyone else understood? Emily lowered her head again, her breast shaky, and Shadow remained beside her, alert as ever. But the courtroom wasn't calm. Not anymore. Because the mystery wasn't unraveling. It was tightening. The judge's gavel hadn't even cooled from its last strike, when the tension in the room thickened again, almost like everyone could sense the storm gathering beneath the surface. The little girl's quiet bravery, the police dog's sharp instinct, the judge's sudden command. Each moment was still pulsing through the courtroom, and no one dare move too fast or breathe too loud. It felt like the air itself was holding its breath. And now, everything was inching towards something bigger, something no one could fully see yet, but everyone felt coming. Officer Daniels shifted his weight slightly, his hand still on the leash, though Max didn't need the reminder. The dog was already locked in, eyes sharp, ears pointed forward like arrows. His entire body was tuned to a level of focus only a trained police K-9 could reach. But there was also something more than training. There was something personal in the way he watched the girl. It wasn't just duty. It was connection. The little girl stayed perfectly still, her small hands clasped tightly together, as though afraid they might betray her with a shake. Her eyes scanned the room again, but this time she didn't look lost. She looked like she was gathering courage. Every tiny movement she made pulled everyone deeper into the mystery. Who was she really signaling? What danger had she sensed? And why did it seem like she trusted the dog more than any of the adults around her? The judge leaned forward, adjusting his glasses once more, and the slight tremble in his hand didn't go unnoticed. He looked less like a man of authority and more like someone who had just stepped into unfamiliar territory. He knew courtroom drama, arguments, objections, sharp words thrown like darts. But this was something different. This was a quiet threat, A shadow he couldn't see, but one that seemed to be standing right behind him. He cleared his throat, voice lower than before. "Everyone remain seated," he said, though the order felt more like a plea for calm rather than a command. "No one leaves." "Not yet." Whispers slipped through the seats like a rising tide. The courtroom spectators exchanged worried looks, trying to guess what was happening without saying anything too loud. Even the attorneys, usually so sharp and composed, looked unsettled. A few shuffled their papers just to keep their hands busy. None of them wanted to admit they were scared, but their eyes gave them away. Still, the little girl didn't look at them. She was staring toward the back of the courtroom again, toward the same direction that had triggered her hidden signal before. Her breathing steadied, her chin lifted just slightly, like she was preparing for something only she could see coming. Officer Daniels followed her gaze, but he saw nothing. Empty benches. Still air. Nothing to explain the way her shoulders tensed or the way Max's fur bristled in slow waves. The judge watched her too now, unable to ignore the weight of that small, determined stare. "Young lady," he said gently, "if there's something you need to tell us, something you saw, you can say it. No one here will let anything happen to you." But she didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, she blinked slowly, her eyes shining with something between fear and resolve. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't hesitation. It was something else. Something that made her seem older than her years, like she'd been carrying a truth too heavy for her small frame. Max took a step forward. Just one, barely a shift, but everyone noticed. Officer Daniels felt the leash tighten slightly. "Easy, boy," he murmured, though his voice wasn't as steady as before. Max wasn't acting on nerves. He never did. Whatever he sensed was real enough that even the calming voice of his handler didn't fully settle him. The tension built, thick and unbroken. A few people near the back leaned away from the benches, as if something dangerous might emerge from behind them at any second. One man clutched his briefcase closer to his chest. Another woman pressed her hand over her mouth. The judge's pen rolled off his desk, clattering loudly on the floor. The sound snapped through the room like a crack, and half the crowd flinched. The judge didn't bother retrieving it. He just stared straight ahead, eyes narrowing. "Officer," he said, still watching the girl, "I want Max on full alert." Officer Daniels nodded, heart beating faster. "He already is, Your Honor." The little girl's lips finally parted, just slightly, as though she wanted to speak. But then she froze again. Her shoulders stiffened, and her eyes widened in a way that made the judge rise halfway from his chair. Max let out a low, rumbling growl. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to stop every person in the courtroom cold. Officer Daniels' grip on the leash tightened instinctively. Max was staring at the same spot the girl had been watching, his body sinking into a ready stance, muscles tight and coiled, like he was preparing for a command he hadn't been given yet. The judge looked toward the back of the courtroom. Still nothing. No movement. No threat anyone else could see. But something was there. Something they couldn't name. The girl stepped closer to Max. Just an inch, like she needed to be near him. Her fingers curled at her sides. Her breathing grew shaky again. The judge softened his voice. "You saw something again, didn't you?" She didn't nod. She didn't shake her head. She just kept staring, eyes fixed, unblinking, at that one empty space in the room. And that was when the door near the corner creaked. Just a small sound, barely a shift of the hinges. But it was enough. Max snapped his head toward the noise, a bark exploding out at him so sudden and sharp that several people gasped. Officer Daniels took a quick step back, tightening his hold just so Max didn't lunge. The door didn't open fully. It didn't reveal anyone. It just moved. But the girl reacted instantly. Her hand flew up, not in fear, but in another clear, deliberate signal. A signal meant only for Max. A signal she shouldn't have known. The judge's face went pale. How does she? But he couldn't finish, because Max responded, not with noise, not with movement, but with a deadly, trained stillness. A stillness that meant one thing. He had just confirmed a threat, and not a small one. The judge slowly sank back into his chair, gripping the edges with both hands. His voice trembled when he spoke. "Officer, what exactly is going on here?" Daniels swallowed hard. I don't know, Your Honor, but Max thinks there's danger. And if Max thinks it, it's real. The judge exhaled shakily. Everyone stay exactly where you are. People pressed back into their seats, afraid to even shift their weight. The air vibrated with tension now, humming like something electric was about to burst. The girl finally looked up at Officer Daniels, her voice barely above a whisper. He's here. Officer Daniels' pulse spiked. Who's here? But she didn't answer. Instead, she pointed, slowly, trembling, toward the back of the courtroom. And as Max's growl deepened, the judge stood up again, fear and authority battling his eyes. Lock the doors, he ordered. Now. But even as the officers rushed to obey, the little girl's gaze stayed locked on that empty corner, as if she knew the real danger was already inside. The man's second step forward felt like it shook the entire courtroom, even though it made almost no sound. It was the quietness that made it feel more dangerous, more deliberate. Rex shifted again, no longer pretending to be calm. His paws pressed firmly into the floor, his shoulders angled toward the man instead of the little girl. And the low, steady breath he took was the kind he used only when he sensed a direct threat. The girl felt every bit of it through the slight pressure of his fur against her leg. Her pulse raced faster, but she kept her face steady, hoping nobody could see how frightened she truly was. The judge's hand hovered over the microphone, but instead of speaking, he raised his other hand, signaling the officers subtly to stay still. He wasn't ready to act, not without understanding exactly what was going on. And the man must have realized this, because he stopped just a few feet away from the aisle and turned his full attention toward the judge, as if the entire room had vanished except for the two of them. Your Honor, the man said with that same unsettling calmness, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. His voice was smooth, too smooth, the kind of tone someone used when they were trying to hide the truth under polite words. He didn't raise his hands. He didn't look afraid. He just looked prepared. And somehow, that confidence made the tension worse. The girl clenched her fingers again, but this time not to give Rex a signal. It was just instinct. Every part of her wanted to reach for him, to hide behind him, to disappear from the man's gaze. But she couldn't do that, not in a courtroom full of people, not when all eyes were already drifting toward her. She knew she had to stay strong, no matter how much her past was suddenly catching up to her. Rex's eyes never moved away from a man. He didn't bark or growl, because he wasn't the kind of dog who wasted energy on warning sounds. He was trained for real danger, danger he had already faced with this very man months earlier during that terrifying night the girl tried hard not to relive. And Rex seemed to recognize something else too, something far more alarming. The man wasn't alone. That realization hit the girl first, even before the officers noticed it. She saw the quick glance he threw toward the side doors near the back of the courtroom. It wasn't an obvious look, just a tiny shift of his eyes, but to someone watching closely enough, it was a clue. The kind of clue Rex instantly responded to. His head snapped slightly toward the same direction, and his body stiffened. The judge caught it too. That was when he finally spoke. Sir, I need you to remain where you are, he said firmly, and I need to know your purpose here. Now! But right when the man opened his mouth to answer, the courtroom doors clicked. Not loudly, not violently, just a small, subtle click. But it pulled every officer's attention at once. Someone else had entered. The second plot twist swept into the room in a way that made the air feel thinner. The girl didn't even want to look, but she forced herself to glance back. A tall woman stepped inside, dressed professionally enough to blend in with the courtroom, but her expression didn't match her outfit. Her eyes darted straight toward the man, then toward the girl, and finally toward Rex. And when Rex saw her, he reacted harder than he had anyone else so far. He rose to his feet, slowly, controlled, but unmistakably ready. The officers finally moved, closing in slightly, instinctively forming a half circle without being told. They didn't know who the woman was, but the synchronized reactions from the girl and Rex were enough to warn them something was truly wrong. The man didn't turn to look at the woman. He didn't need to. His small smile returned as if everything was falling into place exactly as he wanted. I'm not here to cause trouble, he said again, lying so calmly it almost sounded believable. "We just want to clarify a few things." The girl's breath hitched. She recognized the woman, too, but from a very different moment than the man. The woman had been there the day everything changed, the day Rex was injured on duty, while protecting the girl from something she never fully understood. The woman had tried to talk to her before the officers arrived, trying to get information the girl was too scared to give. She had insisted she was helping, but even then, something had felt wrong. Seeing her here meant something dangerous was happening again. Rex stepped forward just half an inch, placing himself slightly in front of the girl. She moved her fingers instinctively, brushing his collar, giving him a quiet reminder to stay measured. She knew he would do anything to protect her, even if it meant risking himself again. The judge noticed everything: the woman, the dog, the girl's fear, the officer's tense stances, and he narrowed his eyes. The courtroom was no longer a place of routine hearings. It had turned into a space filled with hidden intentions, coded signals, and unresolved secrets. And he wasn't going to let it spiral out of control. "Ma'am," the judge said to the woman now, "I need to know who you are and why you've entered my courtroom during an active session." The woman smiled politely, but her eyes flicked nervously toward the man. "I'm here on behalf of someone involved in this case," she replied. "I only want to clarify a misunderstanding, Your Honor." That same word again, misunderstanding. The girl almost flinched. That was the exact phrase the woman had used before, right before everything went wrong. The judge stared at her, unconvinced. He opened his mouth to respond, but something interrupted him. A sudden shift in Rex's posture. The dog's head snapped toward the exit door opposite the woman. Another presence. Another person. The girl's heart dropped. Someone else was there. The stakes shot higher instantly. Whatever was happening wasn't random or accidental. It was coordinated. The judge saw Rex's reaction, and for the first time, true alarm crossed his face. "Officers," he said, his voice firm and sharp now, "secure every exit." But before anyone could move, before the situation could be contained, the man quietly said something under his breath. Something meant only for the girl and Rex to hear. A phrase that froze her blood. A phrase Rex reacted to with a tense, immediate snarl he could barely hold back. The man wasn't here to clarify anything. He was here to finish what he started months ago. And now, with more people entering the courtroom, people the girl recognized and feared, the conflict was becoming something far more dangerous than anyone had realized. The girl grabbed Rex's fur, her voice stuck in her throat. The woman stepped closer. The judge stood up. The man took another step forward, and the real nightmare began to unfold. The moment the man stepped forward again, everything tightened at once. The officers, the judge, the woman near the door, even the silence itself. It felt like the entire courtroom was holding its breath, waiting for something to snap. Rex stood fully now, locked onto the man with total focus. The girl kept her hand on his fur, grounding both of them as she tried to steady the panic rising inside her. She could feel Rex's heartbeat, strong and ready, and she whispered the tiniest breath of reassurance, even though she wasn't sure who she was reassuring more, him or herself. The judge's voice cut through the tension. "No one moves," he warned. It wasn't loud, but it carried enough authority to make the officers freeze mid-step. The man stopped too, but there was a strange calm in his expression, as if he believed he already had controlled the room. The girl saw the same quiet confidence in the woman near the door, and the faintest tremor ran through her. They had planned something they expected everyone else to be too slow to stop. The judge noticed it too. "You're not here for this case," he said sharply. "So who are you really?" The man didn't answer right away. He turned slightly, giving the girl a look that made Rex tense hard enough to unleash a short, restrained bark. That bark shifted everything. It snapped the officers back into motion, triggered a murmur in the gallery, and pushed the moment into a climax none of them could avoid anymore. The woman near the door suddenly reached inside her blazer. Before anyone could react, Rex lunged, not from aggression, but from pure protective instinct. The girl cried out, not in fear of him, but from the shock of the sudden motion. But Rex wasn't attacking. He launched forward just enough to block her entirely with his body, positioning himself between her and the danger he sensed coming. Officers shouted commands. The judge slammed his hand on the bench. The man lifted his hands, as if telling her to wait. And then the unexpected twist arrived. The woman didn't pull out anything dangerous at all. Instead, she held up a badge. A badge that none of them recognized at first. "Everyone stays calm," she announced quickly. "We're with an internal investigation unit. We weren't allowed to disclose our involvement until today." The room froze again. Even the officers hesitated, unsure how to react. The badge looked real. The voice sounded official. The woman's confidence grew as soon as she saw the uncertainty spreading across the courtroom. The man lowered his hands, now looking more like a professional who had been wrongly confronted than a threat. But Rex didn't buy it. He growled, not a loud, wild growl, but the low, steady warning he used only when he sensed someone was pretending. The girl trusted that growl more than anything. She shook her head quickly, trying to speak through the fear tightening her chest. "She's lying," she whispered, barely getting the words out. The judge leaned forward. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "you will place that badge on the table next to you and step back." The woman hesitated, and that hesitation told the truth. The officers moved instantly. Two of them rushed toward her, while another stepped in front of the judge. The woman tried to escape back through the door, but they caught her before she got more than a step away. Her badge hit the ground in the scuffle, and as it slid across the floor, the plastic corner cracked open, revealing the badge wasn't real at all. The courtroom erupted. Rex barked loudly now, backing the man away from the girl, while two officers tackled him. He fought harder than the woman, as if he knew this was his last chance. But Rex kept him cornered long enough for the officers to handcuff him. The girl trembled as everything finally began to crash together. Her past, the fear, the people who had tried to get close to her before. And now this moment, this courtroom, where all their secrets had unraveled. The judge stood, his face pale but steady. "Get both of them out of my courtroom," he ordered, "and check every hallway. No more surprises." The man glared at the girl one last time as he was pulled away, but his glare wasn't victorious or confident anymore. It was the look of someone who knew he had lost. Rex didn't stop watching him until the door slammed shut. The judge finally turned his attention to the little girl. His voice softened. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. She nodded, but her breath shook. She looked down at Rex, who pressed his head against her side, grounding her again. For the first time since she entered the courtroom, she felt something close to safety. The officer surrounded her with genuine concern now, asking if she needed water, asking if she wanted to leave the room. But before she could answer, something unexpected happened. One of the officers approached the judge, holding a phone. "Your Honor," he said cautiously, "you need to hear this. It's from the real Internal Investigation Unit. They just called in." The officer pressed play on the voicemail. A stern voice came through the speaker. "We received a tip that two individuals have been impersonating agents and targeting the child involved in the protected case. They may attempt to appear in a public building today. We're sending a team, but they may already be inside." The girl froze again. That wasn't the twist. The twist came when the voicemail continued. "We also have reason to believe someone inside the courthouse leaked the hearing schedule." The judge looked around the room sharply. Someone inside this very building had helped them. Someone they still hadn't identified. The girl held on to Rex again, realizing the conflict wasn't fully over. Not yet. The main threat was gone, but the mystery who betrayed the court hung heavy in the air. Rex lifted his head, sniffed the air, and looked toward someone sitting quietly near the back. Someone nobody had suspected. Someone who had been silent the entire time. And the girl whispered, barely audible, "Rex knows." It was about trusting the dog who had saved her once and now again. And it was about realizing that even when life brings shadows in the past, light can still break through, sometimes in the form of a loyal friend with four paws and a steady heartbeat. As the car drove away, the girl rested her head against Rex, feeling safe in a way she hadn't felt for a long time. The story wasn't just about danger. It was about survival, teamwork, truth, and hope. And with that, their long, frightening day finally came to a peaceful end.